SWR stands for Stale While Revalidate. Let's explore what that means and see how SWR 2.0 has made preloading data in React and optimistic UI updates easier than ever. Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. Today we'll apply SWR 2.0 React hooks for data fetching, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. I've covered several approaches to data fetching in React on my channel, including a simple useEffect hook with fetch, creating a custom useAxios hook, and creating API layers with libraries like RTK query and React query. Creating an API layer is currently the preferred way most React developers are choosing, and I agree because it separates the API request logic from your components. SWR 2.0 was recently released, and it has some really great, easy-to-use features that may make you decide to choose it for your API layer needs over some of the other options. Two of the features I really like are the easiest optimistic UI updates and prefetching of data that I've ever implemented. I'll cover both of those. Here you see the main page for SWR, which is named after a cache strategy that means stale while revalidate. This means the user interface will show you the stale data until the cached data is revalidated. The process in a to-do list would be post a new to-do, then invalidate the current cache, which is now considered stale, then request new data for the cache, which is revalidating, and then display that new data. Today's code repository has two directories. I'm in one of them right now. The other one is named React SWR Starter. I'm in React SWR Completed that you see here. And there's a link to the code repo in the description. You'll want to follow along by working in the React SWR starter code. And then at the end of this video, I'll give you a challenge, and you'll be able to check your code solution by comparing to the code that you see in this directory that I'm going to complete right here in front of you. So no peeking ahead of time, right? Let's look at this starter code. Now, what we're working with is a to-do list. And I know you're saying, hey, another to-do list, but this isn't about the project. This is about implementing SWR. And so this tutorial is going to implement SWR to a classic to-do list, and that of course hits each of the CRUD operations. That's create, read, update, and delete. So now let's go ahead and go back to the package JSON, and the first thing we're going to need to do is install SWR. I've already put all of the other dependencies in here, so I'll scroll up so we can still see those. Control backtick to open a terminal, and I'll put npm I SWR, and it should add that as a dependency in our package JSON. And we see it here now, and we've got the new version 2.0. Now I just closed a terminal, but let me reopen it because I want to start our JSON server as well. Notice I have a data folder up here, and inside of there is a db.json file, and it's got about 10 to-dos in it. So let's go ahead and start this dev server so it can simulate a REST API for us. So I'll type npx json-server and then -w for watch, and I'm telling it to watch the data folder and look at the db.json file, then -p for port, and we want to put it on port 3500. Press enter, and that goes ahead and starts that up so we can compare and of course query and everything we need to do with the to-dos based on that dev server. With that complete, let's quickly look at what we've got in the API directory, and I've got to-dos API.jsx, and I've created this entire project with Vite. We see the Vite config file down here, and so all of these files will end with .jsx and not just .js. So here we import Axios, and I hope you've worked with Axios before. This is a little more advanced tutorial. It's not necessarily for beginners, but I hope you can follow along with all the code that I've provided. And here we're going to create our base URL to use with Axios for the to-dos API. And once we've created that, and this is something you may not have seen before, but we're going to use this today, and I want one place to define this, and then we can pull it everywhere else we need it, and that is this to-dos URL endpoint. Notice it's just /todos. But we're going to use it in all of our API calls, and we're going to use it in a couple of other places in the application as well. So now notice I've just got what you would consider your CRUD operations. So get to-dos is read, and we get that response and return the response.data from Axios. And then add to-do would be create, and then of course we're passing in a to-do, but notice here I am destructuring because we only need to send the user ID, title, and completed. Our API will create the actual ID for the to-do. I'm going to press Alt-Z too, so this wraps down and doesn't extend off of the screen. And then once again, it's just returning that response.data. The update to do, oh, and I've got a delay in here that I meant to add later. I'll go ahead and remove that for now. And I'll remove it from the delete to do as well because we don't expect to see that right away. Here we go. So now we're going to have this update to do and the delete to do. And of course, we're passing the to do here, and then it updates the to-do and returns the updated to-do. The delete to-do just destructures that ID, and it only deletes the to-do with the ID that is passed in. So that's our full Axios API layer, and we won't need to change those. We'll go ahead and use everything else with SWR in other files. So let's get started. Everything we're going to do is pretty much in the to-do list to get started. So from here, we're going to have a few other imports so we can use SWR, and we see my note right here that says add use SWR here. So we need to import that. So I'll say import and use SWR, and I'll just say from SWR. After that, we're going to import some of the things that we see from that API as well. So here I can say import. And now I'll put these on separate lines because there's several. We had get to-dos, and then we had add to-do, then we had update to-do, and then we had delete to-do. And then we're also going to import that to-dos URL endpoint that we saw before. I said I just wanted one source for that value, and I'm going to rename it. And I'll say as cache key. And I wanted to rename it specifically so you would know what we're using it for when we use it here in this file. Now, if I had pressed tab, it would have completed the first one for me and I wouldn't have to type this, but here I can say 2 dots up and then 2 dots to go up again. And then this is going to come from the API and then slash to-dos API. So let's go ahead and put this use SWR hook in place now inside of our to-do list component. So here I'm going to say const, and we're going to have a list of several things, and you may be familiar with something like this if you've already used React query or RTK query. We're going to have an is loading state, and I want to add that the is loading is new in SWR 2.0, and then we're also going to have an error, but not an is error. We can always just check to see if we have an error at all. Then we're going to have data, and of course I'm going to rename that to do's, and then we're going to have a mutate, and that's a function that we're going to call. And then we can set all of that equal to our use SWR hook. And then here we need that cache key. Remember, we renamed that endpoint cache key when we imported it above. Then we're going to call get to-dos, and that will be passed. This get cache key will be passed. We do not need to add operators or put the get cache or the cache key inside of operators here. So we can just say get to-dos there. But now we're also going to have some options, and these are well documented on the SWR website. The one I'm going to use is on success. So if this is a successful request, then I want to sort the data, and this is a callback here. So I can just pass in data, and after that I can use data.sort because it's an array, and then I'm going to have an A and a B, and this is just a standard array sort function here as I'm sorting the IDs, and I want it in reverse order here. So I'll complete that, and I need B.ID minus A.ID, and that will sort it so the most recent to-do that I've added doesn't go to the bottom of the list, but well, it would actually be that way in the actual order of the data, but we're resorting it so the new to-do is at the top. So when we add it, we see right at the top of our list. So this is going to bring in the data for our page as to-dos. We have an is loading state and an error state as well that we're going to check. And let's scroll down to where we're defining some content, and we can look at that. So we're just checking the is loading state, and if so, we're going to show a loading message. If we have an error, we're going to display that message. Otherwise, we're going to map through the to-dos and display them there. So after that, let's talk about this mutate function, because that's the one we're not using yet. And you can see I've defined an add to-do mutation, an update to-do mutation, and a delete to-do mutation. And all I really have in them is a try catch with a toast notification. And of course, I've got toast for an error or a success. A toast, if you're not familiar with it, is just a little pop-up that will tell you success or failed. So here is where we need to actually call the API and the mutation right here, that mutate function. And really, it's very simple to do. So I'm just going to take this comment and delete it, and I will say await, and then I want to call my add to do that I have imported, and I want to pass in new to do. So that will go ahead and send the request to the API for the new to do, and it will insert that if the request is successful. And afterwards, all we need to do is call mutate. Now, what mutate does is really what SWR is all about. So the data will be stale, and that's what we'll see in our user interface while this other process occurs. But then it also calls for another request, and that's to revalidate the data. So it invalidates the cache data that we have, and it revalidates the data, and then our list will have the new to-do in it, and it brings that back, and it will be brought back as the to-dos that we have up here in our hook, and our component will re-render, and then we'll have that in our list. So let's go ahead and complete our other two mutation functions. So we have the comment here in our update to do mutation. So here we're going to await, and we'll say update to do, and we'll pass in the updated to do. And after that, we'll once again call our mutate function. And now let's do the same for the delete mutation. So down here, we'll say await delete to do. And we want to destructure. Actually, here we're passing in an object with that ID that will later be destructured. And then after that, we'll just say mutate again. And so that's really all we need to do. Now, these are not optimistic updates, but what these are updates to the data at the server level, the REST API. And in the meantime, we're viewing the stale data. So we don't see a loading state. We just see the list that we already had. And then we've invalidated that cache, and the mutation says, go ahead and send me that data from the server again, and I'll update what I'm displaying. So that is stale while revalidate. And if I didn't mention it before, or you're confused by the word mutate or mutation, that's what happens when we change the data. So the read operation in CRUD, that's the R in the acronym CRUD, that's not a mutation, but create, update, and delete are all mutations. And so we're changing that data, and that's the reason for that term. Okay, let's go ahead now and start our application. Of course, I need to start another or open another terminal because we're running json-server in this one. So I'll click the plus here, and now I can say npm run dev, and we should go ahead and fire up our to-do list. It says it's on localhost 5173. I can press Control and click, and it should open that up in Chrome. And I may need to pull that window over. Let's see where I can find it. There we go. We've got a full screen. I can drag it over to the right even just so we see it here. But we've got our full list now. And let's see what happens when I add something new. I'll just say, hey, there it is. And our toast said success. And it really happened fairly quickly. I can delete an item. Success, we deleted. Let's update one. And we just update in a to-do list by saying check, it's completed, or it's not completed, one of the two. Okay, so that is fairly simple. Now let's look at how this process works in a little bit more depth by adding a delay. Now you wouldn't want this delay in a finished product, but I just want to put it in here so you get a better idea of what's happening. Just here below our Axios import, I'm going to define delay, and let's set this equal to a function, and this should just be a one-liner. So we'll have a new promise, and then here we'll have a response. And now inside of the function, we'll say set timeout. And then the function inside of the set timeout has the response. And let's go 800 milliseconds. Full transparency here, this is a similar function, or maybe the exact same function that's in some of the code that's displayed on the SWR code examples as well, because they use this delay to show exactly what I'm going to show as well. So what I'm going to do now is put this delay, or call the delay, inside of all of the API functions. So here I'll just say await delay. And then I'll just copy that, and I'll put it inside the rest of these as well, inside of the add to do, inside of the update to do, and inside of the delete to do. Now we haven't seen anything fail yet either, so let's give the add to do a 50-50 chance of failing, and we can do that with a quick if statement. So I'll say if, and we'll have math.random, and then we'll say if it's less than 0.5, so 50-50 chance, we're going to throw a new error, and we'll just say failed to add new item. And that will be our error. And of course, we should catch that error. We're using try catches. So now let's go back to our to-do list. I'll pull that back up. And then on the to-do list, let's refresh just to make sure everything's fresh. There we saw a little bit of a delay as it took longer to load because we put that inside of our get to-dos as well. So now let me add something new, and it's got a 50-50 chance. I'll say, hey, we're waiting. It added, so we waited for that delay. We didn't see it added to the UI right away. It was added after that delay, and we got the success. Let me update. And we're waiting, and then it goes ahead and updates. And so we see we don't see the change to the UI right away. That's something we will see with an optimistic update. When I delete, we're still waiting. Success, we deleted item. Let's see if I can get one to fail. Say, hey again. Success, it added. Let's try it again. Hey, again. And that one failed, so it never added to the list. We never saw hey again here at all. Okay, I'm going to go back to the code. Now, everything we've applied so far, besides that is loading state, was really available. Oh, and the is loading state's inside of the to-do list. But everything was really available, there it is, in SWR1. Except this is loading state. But now we're about to go a little bit further and apply some things that are now in SWR2, and they're really the things that have made me like it so much. And the first thing I want to show you, because it's fairly easy to demonstrate before we get to the optimistic UI updates, which are awesome, but the first thing I want to show you is what we'll put just in the main JSX. And if you have a create React app application instead of a Vite application, it's probably your index.js or index.jsx. But here we can just preload data, and I would normally do that here in the main or in the index. But say if you had an application that had a login, and then once you were logged in, you went to a dashboard, you might want to wait till you got to that dashboard to preload the rest of the data, because there's no point in preloading anything if someone can't log in, of course. Okay, so you can do this really anywhere in the application. They've made it so easy. So I'm going to import a few things first. I need preload that comes from SWR. After that, I'm going to import a few things I need from the API that we created. So we have the API layer, we have get to-dos. After get to-dos, I also need that to-dos URL endpoint, I believe is what I named that. Let me go back and look real quick. To-dos URL endpoint. Yes, that's what I named it. So now I was back in the main JSX, but I want to name that here as cache key once again, because we're going to use it in a similar way that we did in the to-do component file as well. So now that we've imported those things, all we need to do is call preload, and then we're going to pass that cache key, and then we're going to say get to-dos. And remember, get to-dos will be called and the cache key will be passed to it without us providing operators or explicitly passing the cache key in. And what this does is it preloads the data. And then if you go straight to this to-do list component, it's going to, the hook, useSWR, is going to know you preloaded, or if it's in the middle of preloading, it's not going to call another request again. It's smart enough to know that, hey, I can use what was preloaded. And that's really all there is to it. Just make sure they have the same cache key, so you're referencing the same cache or the same thing you would be requesting, because of course you could have users and other things in an application, so you might have more than one cache of data. Okay, and now let's look at the feature that made me say yes, SWR 2.0 is what I currently want to use for React data fetching. And the feature I'm talking about is optimistic UI updates. And really, optimistic UI updates make the user interface snappier. This is because the UI is updated optimistically, in other words, immediately. And then only if the request fails, the cached data is rolled back to its previous state. Another benefit of optimistic UI updates is that you can tell SWR to skip the revalidate request. So if you're posting a new to-do and it's successful, you've already updated the UI optimistically, and there's no need for the follow-up request to get that data again. Now, optimistic UI updates are available in things like RTK query and React query, but in my mind, SWR 2.0 has made it much easier. So let's take a look. I'll just head to the to-do list component and let's look at these mutations. Now, notice something about these. They're not returning anything. We are awaiting that request where it adds a new to-do to the data at the REST API, and then we just call mutate. And mutate invalidates the cache data that we've had, and it tells SWR to revalidate, to re-request that data once again. And then, of course, when it comes in as the to-dos, we re-render the component and we show the new item. And I put that delay in to show you that it actually takes a while for that to happen. But with optimistic updates, we want to return data right away and add it to the UI, and then we can wait and see if the request is successful or fails. If it fails, we'll roll back the cache to the state that it was in, and if it's successful, that's great. It will just match what we're already showing in the UI. But that does mean we're going to have to change our functions to return something. And I actually don't want to add more logic or a longer list of logic here inside of the to-do list component. So let's go ahead and create a helpers directory inside of our source directory. Call that helpers. And then inside of the helpers directory, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it to-dos mutations.jsx. Now I'm going to need to import some things from our API layer. So we need that add to do. I'll just press tab so we can complete that, but then I'll add the update to do and also the delete to do. So all of those mutation requests I'm going to need to import here into our to-dos mutations so we can use those. So now let's define our function. I'll say export const, and I'll call this add mutation. It's going to be an async function. And since we're going to call it inside of the to-do list, we need to pass in the new to-do. It also needs to receive all of the to-dos because that's what we need to return. We can't just return the one because then that's all that would be displayed. So let's go ahead and receive both of those, and then we'll say const, and I'll just call this added, which would be the to-do that was added on the REST API on the server. So then we'll say await, and then we call our add to do and pass in the new to do. So it's essentially what you would call the result a lot of times, or response there. And then after that, we're going to return, and this is where we need to return all of the to-dos plus the one we just added. But we can't forget that we were sorting the to-dos. Remember, in our on success here in SWR, or useSWR, we're sorting that data so it appears in essentially reverse order, so we get the latest one added at the top. We need to do that again, so I can just copy this here, if it's going to match at least. So I'll copy that, and then I'll go to that to-dos mutation, and when we return that, we also need it to be sorted there as well. So that is our add mutation function. Now, mutate accepts two things. One is going to be the function, like add mutation, that we would pass in. The other is an options parameter. So we can tell the mutate function a few things about what to do with the data. So just below, I'm going to say export const, and I'm also going to create add to do options here. Now let me set this equal to a function, and it's going to receive the new to-do and the to-dos as well, just like above. And then inside of this, we're going to return an object, and this will let us call this function inside of the to-do list, and it will return the options object for us. Now the first thing we want to put is optimistic data, not date, but data. And this needs to be essentially what we're returning above, to-dos. But now notice it's not the added that we receive as a response. It's going to be the new to-do, what we actually sent, because we're optimistically saying, yes, it will be accepted at the server. Now, we also need to sort this data, or it would appear in the wrong order. So we can chain sort there, or it looks a little long that way. I can bring it down to the next line, and it will still work there. Now, remember, this is an object, so I'm going to put a comma after. Now the next setting, I can say rollback on error. Now this is also the default, so if you didn't put it here, it should do this. But this means if the request fails, if we get an error, it's going to roll back the cache to its previous state. And that's what we want to happen. And we'll see that, of course, when we test this out and we have a 50% chance of getting an error. Then we're going to say populateCache with this optimistic data. We'll set that to true. And then revalidate. And this would determine if another request was sent by our useSWR hook to revalidate that data. But if it's successful, remember, it matches what we're optimistically providing. So we're going to set that to false and prevent that extra request from happening. And then it looks like I need to close out the function here with a curly brace. But now, well, I had two. There we go. I'll delete that one. Now we have our options, but it's a function that we're going to call to return these options. And we have our mutation. Okay, let's go back to the to-do list component. Now at the top, we need to import these new functions. Let me put a line between that import there as well. Now here below is where I'm going to import this. I'm going to say import, and the first import, I'll put these on separate lines as well, is going to be add mutation. But I want to say as add to do. We had a previous add to do function, right? So what I need to do here is remove this add to do import that we had above. And now we'll call this function add to do. After that, I also need to import add to do options. And now these should come from our helpers. So one up is to-dos, and then the second up, and here I can choose helpers. And then inside of helpers, we have to-do mutations. And now let's scroll down and apply what we need to. Instead of our await, add to-do, and then calling mutate as we previously did, now we're going to await and call mutate. And then inside of mutate, the first thing we'll pass is the add to-do function. And it receives the new to-do, and it receives the to-dos. And then after that, or a comma, and then we'll call the add to do options function that we created, and it also receives the new to do and the to dos. And remember, it will return that options object. And those are the two things we need. And of course, the await here will make this complete before we would come down to the toast notification. Now let's bring the to-do list back up, and we should see some different behavior than we did before. I'll refresh this once again. It still took a little bit to load because we have those delays in there. But now when I put in a new item, I'll just say new. It's added immediately, but look, then it said failed to add the item and it deleted it. So we had that optimistic update, but then the failure of the request had the cache roll back to its previous state. Let me try that again. I'll say new, and now failed to add the item and it's gone. Let me keep going until maybe I can add one. That also failed. We've got a 50-50 chance. Success. Now we've added our new item and it stayed, but notice we didn't have to wait for the success message or the new item to be added to the list. We had that optimistic update, and then it went ahead and kept it when it was a successful request. And so now my challenge to you, we're here inside of the to-do list. Now remember, we've got two other functions. We've got the update to do mutation and the delete to do mutation. Change these from the old way that say await and update to do and then mutate, and the same for delete down here, and change them to optimistic updates as you saw me apply here. Now remember, that means you'll have to create those helpers just like I did for add mutation and add to do options inside of the helpers directory and the to do mutations file. Also, when you bring those in, remember to delete the update to do and delete to do imports here too. Now, just a couple of hints. When you update the list that you need to return, you'll need to go ahead and filter out the old one, and filter should be a key for you. And then, of course, add in the newly updated to do. And then as far as the delete goes, it's a lot like the update. You just need to filter out the one you're deleting. And if you get stuck, remember you can go to the link in the description and look in the completed directory, because I'm going to complete these before I upload it to GitHub. And then that should help you out as well. So you've got the starter directory and the completed. Go to the starter one, and I hope you do well with the challenge. I think I've set it up for you to succeed. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.